Ocular by Iniquity. Chapter 11. The following day, it was simply too cold to write at his desk, so we had been forced to re-evaluate his strategy. He had found a comfortable position on the floor, rearranging their belongings and finding a large enough book to put in his lap so that he did not have to get out of his blanket pile to write. It was not easy. The words blurred if he looked at them too much, and he found that he had more or less lost the ability to write straight, but it was all he had. As he furiously considered the conclusion to his anti-slavery essay, the tent rustled and Lawrence stepped in. The man was pale with cold, a scowl hovering on his lips, and his forehead creased in anger. Alexander put his pen down, studied him for a moment, and smiled. "You seem in poor spirits, my dear," he said. "Perhaps you would be better if you were to lie with me? Or do you only seek temporary respite between moments of work?"
"It is difficult to stay in high spirits when one must listen in silence to Lee's nonsensical prattle. That the man thinks he could identify and resolve a solution better than General Washington is as absurd to imagine as if I were to captain a ship through a sea storm."
Lawrence paused, his anger leaving him with a sigh.
"And I am dismissed, at least for this instant, though I do not have confidence that the General will not look for me at the spur of the moment."
"A beat.
But that does not ease my desire to lay with you."
Alexander moved his makeshift desk to the side, and Lawrence laid next to him. They rearranged the blanket pile to cover both of them as much as possible.
"I did not invite an ice cube into my bed,"
Alexander muttered when Lawrence wrapped an arm around him and pulled him close.
"I am certain I can find General Lee to lay with you, then. He has spent most of his time here in front of a fire and discussing nothing of any importance."
Alexander could suppress the expression of revulsion that sprung to his face at the thought of the Moorish man lying next to him.
"I did not deserve such cruelty,"
he said sternly over the sounds of Lawrence's laughter.
"It is not befitting of your character to tease the sick with such horror."
The laughter receded, but the smile remained, and Alexander could not help but stare at the brightness that stayed in the other man's eyes. All of a sudden, his cares were eased, and he was no longer concerned about Lee or the battle. In the face of such overwhelming beauty, he found it difficult to hold any great concerns about anything. How could he be anything but in love with a man of such amazing character and integrity? Not to mention exquisitely handsome. It seemed absurd to imagine any other way his feelings could arrange themselves.
"Yes, you suffer so," Lawrence replied, closing his eyes and stroking Alexander's hair. "As for their punishment, I will discuss with you the goings-on of the camp, with a grip such as the one I have."
He squeezed Alexander in a way that made the man's heart sing!
"You will never escape this torture."
"I already feel the fear and terror of the upcoming events,"
Alexander mumbled, unwrapping Lawrence's cravat so he could put his face in the man's throat.
"Do not seek to drive me mad by waiting, I beg."
It seemed that Lawrence had scarcely sat all day. As Alexander had suspected, the man became almost unreasonably busy, burdened with the work of both of them. He had crafted some letter to Congress, asking for more winter supplies, such as blankets and tarps. He had run back and forth between Lafayette and Washington at least 10 times as they counted stores and tried to create some kind of order in the quartermaster's office, and a variety of other tasks Alexander usually would have done himself. After the summary of his overworked schedule, he launched into an explanation of the meeting he had sat in on regarding the upcoming battle. That it was snowing and freezing was unfortunate, but Washington was adamant that they could not wait. If their guns did not fire, they were equipped with bayonets, and there had been a further scour of the camp for sabers and other small hand weapons. Lee had added some objection, which Lawrence explained Hamilton would have gotten himself court-martialed disagreeing with.
"I could not imagine the lengths General Washington would have had to go to soothe his temper had you been there to point out all the clear and notable flaws in his alternative plan. And do not propose to me you would have stewed in silence, because certainly there is no way for you to keep your personal opinions to yourself," Lawrence was saying.
"I would duel a man if need be," Alexander said.
"I have no doubt that you would, given that nothing is more serious to you than an infraction upon your legacy."
"You are more serious to me," Alexander replied without thinking. There was a strange pause in his head.
He had not meant to say the words, or realized they had been uttered until after he had heard them, and then realized they had been said in his voice.
Lawrence kissed him atop his head with a little chuckle.
Afterwards, Lafayette and I, you know, of course, that Lafayette dislikes Lee almost as much as you, had a drink. He bemoaned your absence, as he likes listening to you insult Lee rather too much, in this man's esteemed opinion.
John?
Alexander said, for a queer feeling had settled over him all of a sudden. He could not stop thinking of what he had just said. He had said so without consideration, with no attempt to flatter. It had simply been the truth.
May I speak to you in confidence as my dearest heart?
Lawrence tilted his head to cast him a slightly concerned look. The man had caught the uncertainty in Alexander's voice as surely as if he had cast a net.
Of course you may, Hamilton. You always may do so without asking. Certainly you know that there is no one that I trust more, or that I would reach for first to save in the heat of battle.
Alexander waited a moment before speaking. He was not sure precisely what he wanted to say, which was an uncomfortable and unfamiliar feeling. He tried to cast his mind back to start without thinking.
While I have been sick, and when I suspect I am the most ill, after I passed out on the march certainly and recently, I have these dreams. I am still not certain if they are actually dreams, in all honesty, because they have a peculiar type of intensity and sense to them that is not familiar to me.
He shook his head. That had been wrong. He had to readjust.
And nevertheless, in these events, I seem to experience both a hurricane that devastated my town as a child, and also these abominable snow and hailstorms that have seemed to become the army's best friend.
He was not familiar with the sense of struggling for words, and somehow nothing seemed an adequate explanation. But it could not be helped. He had to continue.
Sometimes I am standing in the storm, drowning. Sometimes I am not a true person, but I am feeling the storm as if I am a tree or a beast. Sometimes it seems as if the storm has weapons, like it can strip the flesh from my bones, or it aims with specific intent to strike me with lightning. Sometimes the hailstones would beat on me to draw blood, and the blood would freeze, and...
He paused and noticed Lawrence was staring at him still. He could not read the man's expression. The conversation momentarily escaped him. He reached for the thread of it.
I admit to not knowing if you possess any understanding of hurricanes, so I apologize if I speak as if you were ignorant, he said, trying to get back on track. But the nature of a true hurricane includes a brief pause in the center. There are ferocious storms, and in the center there is the eye of the storm, a sort of lull in the chaos. When the lull ends, the storm resumes. To me, it had always felt like coming up for air when swimming.
He pressed a kiss to Lawrence's slightly open mouth. He could see the end of the subject now, suddenly clear. A fog had lifted.
Your care was the eye of my storm. When you were with me, the storm ceased. I did not feel like I would be swept away, frozen, or drowned. When you were with me, I felt like I would survive.
I am glad that I could help you,
Lawrence managed to whisper. He shifted to stroke Alexander's hair and pull him close.
To watch you struggle, to watch you be so sick, it was almost more than I could bear. To see you in such agony and to feel so helpless other than to squeeze water into your mouth and move your blankets was a torment I cannot express. I could not stop from myself asking horrible questions. What would this war be like without you? What would be the point? What was the value of a new free nation, if not for you to be there to enjoy it by my side?
Alexander met his eyes, and they held each other tight for a long moment.
My dear John,
he mumbled, inhaling the smell of the man's skin.
You have done so much for me. Without you, I would not be here. I must tell you, now that you know this about me, about what you have done for me, that I love you.
Lawrence went still around him. Alexander felt fear rise like bile in his chest. He squeezed his eyes shut, praying to any gut that would listen, to imagine Lawrence saying no, or... Lawrence's hand pulled the tie from his hair, and he ran his fingers through the strands.
Alexander chewed the inside of his lip and fought the urge to scream.
What does it feel like?
Lawrence asked. His voice was inquisitive, curious. He wanted to know more. He was not recoiling in disgust. He did not hurry to report a crime in action. He was not pulling away in horror. He was right there, drawing his hand through Alexander's hair and holding him close. To love you? Alexander asked, feeling stupid.
Yes.
He took a breath. He could do this. He could not back off now. He would not get this chance again. There would be the battle and work to do, and the general. When I see you, my heart lifts. It is as if a private sun is peeked out from behind a cloud to bathe me in warmth. It is as if my cursed fever flees you. He slid one hand to caress Lawrence's face, reveling in the feel of his skin. There is no one who understands me as you do. If I present you a problem that vexes me, you always point out a solution. If I have some issue to work through, you alone know the important points to consider. To see you during the day while we work, it is a small blessing in our dark world. When you laugh, I feel as if nothing could be wrong. When you are upset or injured, nothing could be worse. To have you away from me feels as if I am missing a limb. When we are far, I count the days until I can look upon you again. Alexander took a breath and prepared to continue, but Lawrence's gaze stopped him.
I think I must be in love with you too, then, Alexander,
Lawrence said, leaning in to kiss his forehead.
For I know all these things. They are feelings I feel for you. When you smile, my world brightens. Even to watch you work, muttering and shaking your head, is a gift. The passion you exude into all walks of life is like a glow I cannot help but go towards, like a moth to your flame.
For a few moments, Alexander forgot to breathe. Lawrence stroked his hair thoughtfully.
Is it the way I cannot help but smile as you come to some brilliant conclusion? Is it that, while you are ill, I can scarcely consider any other work? Is it the joy I feel when your health improves? Is it the warmth that spreads through me when we touch?
He was having trouble speaking. Yes, it is those things.
Well, then I must love you, Alexander.
Lawrence made a thoughtful face as if testing the words.
Now that I have said it, I can be sure it is the case. I love you.
Lawrence looked at him and Alexander felt his smile stretch from ear to ear.
There is no one who completes me like you.
My love, John. The moment seemed too large. He was going to drown in it. It was a different kind of drowning. He could not express the joy there was to be found in this kind of drowning.
I have never seen you so consumed in your own feelings, Hamilton.
Lawrence teased.
Many have tried, but it seems I alone have accomplished the task of conquering you.
Were all kings to be as wonderful as you, we would not have to fight this accursed war, Alexander replied with a playful grin on his face. What royal decrees will you force me to submit to? Something in Lawrence's eyes flashed hot. His grin turned wicked. Alexander probably forgot whatever witty remark he had soared. It did not occur to him until that moment that being in love with Lawrence might include more than making his soul sing. Certainly the man could generate passion within his heart and eat his blood, but he recognized the bolt in his stomach as something very different.
Well,
Lawrence began pulling him close so he could whisper in his ear. Alexander was not sure. Lawrence knew the torture he created. He was not sure what to say to keep him from stopping. For he knew this heat. He knew the sense of it, the trickling of breath so close across his skin, the subtle promise of a future that it brought. He could not stop his thoughts from wondering if they were in love. What could he do to Lawrence? Could he work Lawrence as he could work Eliza? Certainly there were technical differences, of course, but he had immense equipment and understood the details, and certainly Lawrence could not be so different from him in terms of desires. He reached hesitantly and drew his fingers across the line of Lawrence's chapped lips. There was a flicker of a pink tongue and sudden wetness at the top of the digit.
I would not like you to revolt, Lawrence said, looking at him. I would prefer you to be an obedient servant.
Alexander whimpered before he could stop himself.
It is not in my nature to be obedient, he answered, gathering himself back together. Lawrence could not be interested in him yielding so easily. No one who knew him could be interested or expect such an outcome. But he did not deny that immediately submitting to Lawrence had an appeal that no other surrender had ever come close to. I possess too many revolutionary ideals. I have been called a malcontent. In such a case, Lawrence began, but then a monumental catastrophe occurred.